for everyone coming. I'm Christoph Santa. I'm a research assistant at the University of Liverpool. My background is in health and clinical psychology, but my current work involves improving health and mental health services in Blackpool and the Five Coast area. That's why this session is based here. And this session will be about literature reviews, so we will be looking at a couple of steps, overview it, and how to simply review published works, what is available to you. Before we go any further, some introductions are in place. If we could go from the right. So why don't we jump into it straight away? There are some objectives for the session. So we have 2 hours, but we will try to cover a significant amount. One of the goals will be that at the end of this session, you will be able to understand the process and the key steps involved in conducting literature reviews. The other goal is to gain practical skills in searching for and evaluating relevant literature, whether that is for your work, for your studies, or even just for real life scenarios. And the third one is simply to feel confident in conducting basic literature reviews that is related to GOT, obviously, to understand the evidence base of what is out there. I will be demonstrating some resources for that, how to go on about things. And this session was built around the recommendations outlined by the Cochrane Guidance for Rapid Reviews. The link is there. I will be sending the slides for everyone after the session. Also, the session is recorded, by the way, just so you know, if you're okay with that. But we will be cutting out everyone's name. And back to this, I will be sending the slides to everyone, and this is freely available online. So, quick show of hands. Has anyone ever did a literature review, by the way? Yes? Yeah? Ish? That's all. So, what is a literature review and what is its relevance in this context? So first of all, it establishes the current state of knowledge. It overviews existing research by doing a literature review, we can see what is out there, what has been published before, and we can create a comprehensive work to demonstrate to others and create an overall view of the specific topic you are looking at. Also, you can identify gaps and research opportunities. So, if you are doing a literature review, you can identify gaps, inconsistencies, or unanswered questions in the existing literature. This is also useful for providing opportunities for new research, for example. You can also synthesize information to present a coherent understanding of the topic you are looking at. And the last point on this slide is to support research objectives. So the project I am currently on involves conducting a rapid literature review. The purpose of it is to support what we will be looking at later, to look at what is known currently, whether there are any kind of gaps, and whether we could address any kind of gaps based on our current aims, if that makes sense. And the first step to conduct a literature review is that you have to identify your research question or topic. So when you approach a literature review, you would know what is the rough area. You don't just snap your finger and think, I'm going to do a literature review. You would have some kind of broad idea based on your work or your studies. But you will have to narrow that down to simply create a more specific aspect or view on an issue. When you're narrowing down a research question, you have to think about gaps in current knowledge and the practical relevance and the feasibility of studying the chosen topic. Okay? And as part of this, you should conduct preliminary research. You have to check what is out there. If you will not engage in checking what is out there, you might replicate someone else's study and it will lose its value. So first, identify your research question, check whether it has been done before, and then adjust your aims or objective based on that, and potentially your research question, because then you can still build on others' studies. And once you've done your preliminary research, then refine and clarify your research question, because by that time you know whether it has been done before or has not, and then you can specify it. Make sure it is specific, focused, and concise. It really will help to avoid overly vague or broad topics like that, and to address your agenda using a systematic, in a systematic manner. And a recommendation, we are not going into this in a lot of detail, but you can consider using a framework to set up your research question. There are some tools online that are actually very useful. We will look at them just now. Has any of you heard about frameworks to formulate research question like PICO? No, that's enough. So we were talking about a framework to formulate your research question, and an example of this is PICO. So that's an acronym for Population, Intervention, Comparison, and Outcome. So when you are formulating your research question, it is quite important that it contains relevant information for the reader. And I did include this link on the slide. And this is a website from the University of London, and it gives you a number of frameworks that you can use to set up your research question. They are actually very, very easy to use, especially because on this website, it gives you an example, excuse me, how to set up your research question. So you got PICO here, once again, Population, Intervention, Comparator, and Outcome, and it asks you the question, describe your patient population or problem in the research question, what intervention is being considered, comparison, and what outcome are you looking for? And it gives you a scenario as well. So if you just use this table, input the information you are looking for, and then you pretty much have the research question. You just have to adapt it into a question. Simple as that. And obviously we have other options here as well. So that is PICO. CocoaPop is very simple and straightforward. I used that before. It is definitely worth a look. Spider is quite widely used as well as Spice. Okay. So here are some example questions from public health research questions, and the first one is an example of how to use PICO. So comparing the effects of exercise, which is the intervention, versus no exercise, which is your comparison, exercise versus no exercise, on physical functioning and quality of life, which is your outcome. What are you looking for? What effects are you looking for? Of elderly individuals, you got the population or patients in long-term care facilities. And we have other examples there as well. They are not necessarily based on PICO, however, they might include a comparator. So for example, the third one, does a school-based nutritional education program intervention influence dietary habits, BMI and risk factors for childhood obesity, so outcome, in children aged 5 to 12 years, so you have the population. So we have population, intervention, and outcome, but there is no comparator. But generally, for these type of studies, it is in the actual study, because they might compare the nutritional education program to standard curriculum, for example. So another example, what are the effects of community-based mental health support services on mental health outcomes among individuals with mental health disorders? So again, we have population, outcomes, which is quite generic in this case, and the effects of community-based mental health support services. So you have the intervention. And the last one quickly, so how do mobile health smoking cessation interventions, straightforward intervention once again, compared to traditional face-to-face interventions? So we have a comparator here in terms of smoking cessation success rates and long-term abstinence. So we have the outcome here. The population is not mentioned here, but we can assume we are talking about smokers. So once you set up your research question, you will need to narrow your focus of the type of articles you are looking for early on. For this, you will need to refine your inclusion and exclusion criteria for the studies you are looking for. To establish a clear and systematic approach to select relevant studies. So the question is that how will a well-defined research question how is it relevant and will help you develop the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So as we mentioned, it again feeds back to this, the research question will specify the population, or ideally it should. So now you know what kind of population you will be looking for, and that will be one of your inclusion criteria, for example. The research question should also guide the identification of the specific interventions. Once again, it feeds back. If you are looking for an intervention, then it will be in the research question, and that could be your inclusion criteria, or if relevant, exclusion. We will go into these in detail in a sec. And it will also help you identify the outcomes of or variables of interest. So there were examples of BMI, smoking cessation, and quality of life, if you are looking for anything like that. And a well-defined research question will also help you to establish the boundaries and scope of the study, which is coming up next. So, the scope and the time frame. What kind of geographical area are you looking for? Are you looking at the UK, in between rural or urbanized areas? Are you looking at immigrants moving into urbanized areas from rural areas? It really depends. What is your time frame? What are you looking for? Are you looking at digital mental health services? Because if you are, then you might be looking at back to 15 years only, because that technology did not exist before. Or if you are looking at something more historic, like single point access, for example, then you might have to go back 30 years, or if you are looking for even longer, then you might have to go into physical books, because it might not be available online. Identify relevant study designs and sources. So this is important based on what you are looking for. Are you looking for randomized control trials, cohort studies, for example, cross-sectional studies, studies that use focus groups, interviews, workshops, for example, or are you looking at quantitative studies only that use only quantitative data? You will have to define these, which will make your identification of studies later on much easier. Specify the population, and as you can see, it's already coming back from your research question, and if you use the framework, so we have population and sample patient characteristics. It's always good practice to include age, gender, and ethnicity for demographic details. And are you looking at any kind of clinical characteristics? Does your sample have dementia, for example, or any kind of mental health issues? You will have to define these, because this kind of criteria makes your research more transparent. You will be able to trace it back, what you are looking for, based on your decisions, and the reader of your review will be able to decide how did you decide on the selection of studies. And determine language and publication criteria. So are you looking at studies from the UK, Canada as well, or the US? So obviously we are looking at English-speaking countries, or are you looking at more from the Asian sphere? It is also good practice to identify these. And you could further consider intervention exposure, so it comes back again, and outcome measures, as you mentioned. So I'm not going to go into these in much more detail, because it will depend on the topic you will identify for your review. Also, I wanted to mention that when you identify your publication criteria, you will have to consider whether it is ideal for you to look for unpublished literature or grey literature, which means that you are looking at magazines or blogs or expert reviews that are available online, but they are not peer-reviewed and they are not potentially published by your journal. And small print documents the criteria in a clear and transparent manner, again, so you can trace it back. Why did you set up your criteria, and on what will you base the selection of your studies later on for your review? And since you have inclusion criteria, we have an exclusion criteria as well. So consider what should be excluded from the review that is relevant to the reader of your review. Are you excluding any specific populations, specific type of studies, geographical locations or languages? And as mentioned there, just notice the trend. It is almost the opposite of your inclusion criteria, but you have to keep it relevant. If you do not need to mention that you excluded children, if your inclusion criteria mention that you are focusing on adults aged 65 plus with dementia. It's just not relevant to your review nor for the reader because it is obvious since you mentioned it before anyway. And I mentioned randomized control trials, cohort studies and cross-sectional studies. When you are setting up your inclusion and exclusion criteria, it is important to consider what will you be including. What type of studies will you be including in your review? So, will you be including meta-analysis and systematic reviews? It is unlikely, but it is worth to mention. It is the highest level of evidence by combining and evaluating the results of multiple studies, similar to a literature review. You might include randomized control trials. They are the gold standard in clinical research. A lot of researchers try to employ this as it minimizes bias and provides strong evidence for causal relationships. Cohort studies are included quite a lot because it follows a group of individuals over time for comparisons. They have a baseline at time 1 and what happened at time 2. Between the times actually, whether there was any change. You have case control studies. It compares individuals to a control group, generally for interventions. Researchers implement an intervention, for example, see whether that works. The other group doesn't get that intervention and see whether there is any kind of difference. Cross-sectional studies are very often used as well. It collects a data at a specific point to assess relationships, generally between two populations. Otherwise, there is no comparison. And one of the lowest level of evidence is early stage and laboratory research animal trials and in vitro studies conducted in laboratory settings, usually using petri dishes. If you are searching for something very specifically clinical, like reviewing whether any kind of early stage medicine had any kind of effects in animal trials, you might not use these. Grey literature we have at the bottom. Case reports, opinion papers and letters. Some of them, it depends what type of literature we are talking about, but generally they are considered grey literature. And the issue with them that they can be subjective, lacks generalizability, and lacks systematic methodology. Any questions so far, by the way? No? Okay. Carry on then. So the next step in conducting a literature review, because we have identified our research question, we narrowed it down, we refined it, and we have also identified our inclusion and exclusion criteria. Next, you have to choose your sources to search for literature. You have a number of databases that are available to you, regardless whether you have any kind of subscription with the university or via your work. PubMed is the best, in my opinion, in this case. Google Scholar is good. but their algorithm is a little bit messy in my opinion. We will go into that in a little bit more detail, we'll see. Cochrane library is very good and very reliable. They, they publish high quality evidence. ProQuest is also available. I believe you have to register, but it's free. Same with Semantic Scholar. I don't think you have to register, but it is available. Not all of the articles are available there, but it is another source for you. Other useful resources, they don't exactly count as databases, but Connected Papers. It is a data visualizing tool. So it collects literature from Google Scholar and Semantic Scholar. And let me just show you actually, because this can be a little bit different. Has anyone used any of the databases before, like PubMed, Google Scholar?
Some of them, yeah.
Okay.
Not at uni.
You? Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm not going to go through like PubMed, Google Scholar, because you know about it. This is Connected Papers. This is not a database, but I always like to look at this because the way this works is that it compares studies, citations. That's how it finds similarities. So I am interested in, I'm just going to look for something random, mental health and CBT. It will give, so you obviously can search for studies based on titles. I'm just going to click on this. It has one citation, so this may not be the best. Let's see. Let's go with this one, for example. Okay, so I did click. It looks scary, but it's really not. I did click on this study. If you click on the search bar, you can input your own study that you are looking for. This is very useful if you are looking, if you found a study and you really like it, and you want to find more simply. So at this point, it shows you mental health problems, use of mental health services. So you have that study at the middle, and it gave you a number of studies that are potentially similar one way or another. And you have a little question mark here, where it explains what this all means, actually. So papers arranged according to their similarity. This is not a citation tree. Note size is the number of citations. So for example, Blanchard 1996 was cited a good number of times because it is big. Note color is the publishing year. So the darker it is, the newer it is. It's quite small from there, isn't it? Let me just try to zoom in. I don't think it's possible. Can you still see it fairly well? Okay. And similar papers have strong connecting lines and cluster together. So in this case, it is expected that Hogg, if I can hover over that, Hogg, Seal, Hogg again, of course, and we have Seal again, and Millikan, they talk about the same things in their papers. Be careful using this tool as it can be inaccurate, but it gives you a different type of idea of how to look for literature. And I found it quite useful if I'm looking at a particular topic. I am not that familiar with it, so I'm going to explore a little bit. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes?
Can it be used by author names?
Yes, should be possible. Should be possible.
Curious.
Well, let's check it now. Have you got any author in mind?
Oh, I don't know. Jemda? H-G... H-J? I don't I have well, very bad English mind.
That's okay.
H-J, not J-G.
Why?
Udin Jemda. How you
I
spell
guess it would be. What is that again?
Jemda? Udin? Udin?
Houdin.
Our colleague. Udin. Odin.
Ah, okay.
His name, how you spell it?
I can't remember.
H-G-J or J, I don't know. Oh,
That's-
just whatever name, just if it works by.
And the person
No.
came up with Houdin in it.
No.
No. That, it doesn't matter.
But
Doesn't
you
matter.
can
I can't
search.
spell it in English.
That's okay, don't worry at all. But you can search by name. So, for
You
example,
can, okay.
we had
I don't know what
Millikan.
is middle one.
We had Millikan there. I'm not sure whether it's a single L or a double L.
Or you can check Maston, and Maston, like, you know,
Yeah.
she's quite good in.
But we have the name there, so Per Cycle Partners with Millikan. So this is an article, looks like it. So we can search by name, looks like it.
You
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, yeah. But you can also search by name on Google Scholar, actually.
Yeah.
And I was meant to include ResearchGate on this. I'm not sure, I do apologize, that's not on it. ResearchGate you can also use to search for articles, even if you don't have a subscription with university. So you just, when you go on to register, I think you just click on that you are not associated with any kind of organization. And I don't think you even have to register, but it's possible to download the PDFs, I did check that, or from authors who have it available on their websites. Paperity and CiteSeerX, so these are databases as well. I am not going to click on them now, but I don't think they count as databases, but an additional resource for you to check as well if you wish. And also you should find, or you should check references of articles you find. So it is always good practice. If you are doing a review, back to that, and you found a good paper that is relevant to your review, it is worth to check the references because it might include papers that are directly relevant to your inquiry. Next, once you have identified what kind of sources you will use, you can obviously change that and look into sources and resources again, whether they will fit your agenda. You should define your search terms. So that's where your research question and the inclusion criteria will help you. It all rolls forward. You should identify the key concepts first of all, in relation to your research question or topic. Since you have identified your research question at this point, it shouldn't be too hard. What are the key concepts? What are you looking for exactly? You should brainstorm synonyms. So if you are looking for child, if you are looking for, via your research question, population that includes underage children, you should be looking at maybe adolescents, teenagers, children, so synonyms. And related terms, of course, and alternative phrases that are commonly used in the literature to capture a wider range of relevant literature. So do a preliminary research as well. See how the review talks about these kind of concepts. If you are looking for a more technical term like outcomes or interventions, like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT for example, check acronyms as well and implement it in your search terms. Consider different spellings, abbreviations, acronyms, and variations of terms straightforward. And an example of this, so how will you go on about doing this? An example research question, how does the implementation of workplace meditation programs affect employee quality of life? So you have to break down the question into segments. Take your time with it. We have meditation here, because we have meditation programs, employee, so we have workplace and employee. I did bring that together for now as a key concept. And quality of life, so we have the outcome there. And find synonyms or relevant words for the segments. That is also very straightforward, isn't it? So we have meditation, a synonym for that is mindfulness, for example, or positive thinking. It depends how the literature available discusses these. Then for employee we have worker, staff, workforce, and quality of life is a half outcome, so that's a synonym for that as well. Does that make sense? Now that you have found synonyms for your key concepts and search terms, what's next? What you should do with it? Because you have identified your databases, you have your search terms, but you have to input those into your databases. you have to combine your search terms. And for this, you have to use Boolean operators. Has anyone heard of Boolean operators? No? Yeah? Okay. It sounds a bit scary and a bit too technical, but it's actually very, very easy to use. Generally, 3 Boolean operators are used, and or not. So the and narrows down the search, the or broadens the search, and the not excludes specific terms. We'll look at an example in a second. And as I mentioned, when you set up your search terms, just experiment and iterate. Don't be afraid to go back and change your search terms and improve upon it and give more examples, more synonyms. You can also use controlled vocabularies. I am not going to go into it, but just a heads up so you know about these. It depends on your line of work. Your superior or your type of work will ask you to use medical subject headings. They are available via PubMed, it's called MESH, or the thesaurus of psychological index terms in PsycInfo. So these are used to set up your search terms on a more standardized and more systematic way. It's worth to look into, but it's not a must at all. So a couple of examples on how to use the Boolean operators. And this topic includes truncation and wildcards as well. So we have here the OR operator, which broadens the search. So OR means more results, and narrows it, and not once again excludes it. The example, if you mention postpartum depression or postnatal depression, then the database will give you findings in relation to both, because you specify that you need this or this. If you are looking for postpartum depression and postnatal depression, the difference is that the database will give you findings of articles or abstracts that has to have both in them. And the not operator you can specify it if you are looking for specifically for something, but not for something else. So if you are looking for studies that included women only, you should mention that you are not looking for men. Another relevant operator, or more like truncation I would say, it is very useful as well when you put that little star at the end of the word. So it's useful if you are looking for studies from the UK and the US as well because of the different spelling. So we see the behavior spelled as O-U-R at the end and behavioral O-R at the end. So it will find you studies both from the US and the UK regardless of the spelling, and obviously have behavioral as well. So for example, if I am looking for studies in relation to something cognitive related, I could type in COGN and I put that little mark in there, and it will find me studies that mention cognition, cognitive behavioral therapy, so the variations. Wildcards are also useful, but in my opinion it's a bit more restrictive. Here is the example for that, because it will find you a word only that where the spelling might be different. And another small print, it is worth to consider proximity operators. I personally don't really use it. It's quite a niche thing to use, but it goes along the lines of that you can put a particular number into your search terms and it will find a particular word 4 words or 5 words away in a sentence, for example. There are specific rules based on the databases you use, but it's good to know about it. Any questions? No? All good? Okay. that's an activity. And what time is it? Okay, so how about, since we have 3 people, why don't we make this activity 15-20 minutes, and at the end of it we could have a break? What do you think? So the activity is that if you could get into a group, please. Choose a topic and define a research question. Don't take it too far, so something fairly basic, but just a bit of practice really for those who didn't do this yet. Develop inclusion and exclusion criteria. I will go back to that slide just to show you that how to go on about that. And difference insertions, some synonyms, acronyms, abbreviations, variations of the key terms you're looking for. And we could discuss at the end. Okay? The activity, have you managed to finish it? Yeah. Great. Let's talk about that a bit. Is there a specific person who would like to talk us through what you have found, what you have discussed, or do you want to go one by one? As per stages, so like research question, because there are 3. Anyway.
Yeah, what we could do, if I say what topic was, and then obviously you got different interpretations of conclusion. So the main topic we were looking at was digital poverty on a whole. Basically, like looking at when we came to look at the criteria and narrowing it down. So we thought of doing digital poverty for low income, how it affected low income families. And obviously that then would have brought out, depending on how, as we asked about the terms, because it would then incorporate like education, work, and the effects. So I'll get you to explain, for example, since you gave an example about Ukraine and...
Yeah, so we were looking at like also inclusions and exclusions. So inclusions would be like, well, anybody like doesn't have access to the broadband or to the gadgets,
yes,
or to the mobile phones. And mostly exclusion would be like wealthy people who have access to everything.
Yeah.
But we also talked about, like, say, with Ukrainians or other refugees who come here. They might say arrive here with the gadgets that they bought in another country. And then when they come here, they don't have access to the broadband or the mobile network, or say Vodafone would give 6 months free network and broadband on the mobile that they would use for 6 months, but after that cut-off point they have nothing to use because they've got no credit history in the country, so they can't get like a mobile contract.
I see.
So, and also very often, say, in Ukraine or in another country, they'll be quite educated, have good like careers and good positions, but they come here, they can't speak good level of English, and mostly everything is now digital. So like they have to apply for benefits digitally, they have to apply for work digitally, for anything they need, it's all online.
Yeah.
And language is another barrier for like digital illiteracy, because first they don't know where to search for things,
yes,
and second, if they do find them, they don't know how to respond to them or how to fill in the forms, or they don't have enough the language, and very often the interpreters are not available either.
Yeah.
So we have that, and also because of that they can't get a better job, so they'll have to either stay on the universal credit or on low income jobs like cleaners, or you know, like a school assistant, and like as well, just like a dinner lady. So they wouldn't have enough money to go and buy like either laptops they need outright, or again they can't get enough credit history to get the contract for what they need. So, and then we have a defined,
Yeah, very interesting discussion, because probably that difference between the terms, between gap, divide, literacy, poverty, there's some specific characteristics of each one, or context where they are used. So it is a very fine or delicate work to really decide which one to use according to what we are looking for. And also, it was very interesting because the term poverty or economic exclusion is like very broad, but when you see the specific case of the refugees or migrants, yeah, they are also economically excluded and mostly end up in poverty as part of the process of migration, especially in the case of refugees. But they get obscured if they are not acknowledged specifically the migration or refugee process, for instance, no, in this kind of search. So it's super interesting to see how delicate work is to define the specific inclusion or exclusion criteria.
Yeah.
So super interesting.
Okay, no, well done everyone. That is a very good topic to explore really, and you addressed it well as well. It sounds good. And in terms of inclusion criteria as well, you addressed it well as well, and the research question. And the search terms fed into the inclusion and exclusion criteria, which is good. Something.
It's not the same, the exclusion criteria or the search terms.
It's not the same. No, but they feed into each other. Because from your inclusion and exclusion criteria and your research question comes the search terms, right? And something to think of in terms of criteria and search terms as well. Like, that's why you should, for example, read into the literature as well. You mentioned two terms separately, but they kind of relate to digital exclusion as well, for example. Or
Five terms now.
Yeah.
We were four.
Yeah, there you go. So, and you could think about like digital advancements in terms of literature. What type of specific literature there is in terms of digital advancements that might affect people who are in digital poverty or experience digital abuse. And you can use a single reviewer to rate a risk of bias with full verification of all judgments and support statements by a second reviewer. So limit risk of bias ratings, I will not go into them, but it is worth to remember. And again, the slides will be forwarded to everyone. Actually, let's look at an example of the study quality assessment tools. There are more than one website of collection of study quality assessment tools, but this is from this is PubMed related as well. So you have a list, for example. These two should be quite similar. The assessment tool for cohort and cross-sectional studies, and case control studies, for example. And if you are doing a review, those two would be the most likely that you are using, unless you are evaluating controlled intervention studies, so for randomized controlled trials. Or again, as we have looked at the pyramid, if you remember, we have case series studies and studies with no control group. And if you click on this one, for example, that one gives you the checklist straight away. So as I mentioned, yes, it's a 1, no, it's a 0, for example, just simplify it for yourself. Was the study population in the study you have included in your review clearly specified and defined? Simple as that, isn't it? And you just go through, and the best thing about it is it gives you quality rating, good, fair, or poor, and it gives you examples and descriptions for each of the questions as well. So it gives you some guidance as well. Okay. There is another link as well, but that is for your own records. Okay. And once you have selected the studies, you have extracted all the data you need, it has been reviewed by a second reviewer potentially, and you are all happy with it, then you should synthesize your evidence narratively. So here comes the brighter part. Identify common themes, trends, or patterns, and synthesize the findings in a coherent and meaningful way. So, based on your extraction data table, you should write up what you have found in a way that displays narration. So it shouldn't be like a list format, but it should have a good flow. And you should maintain objectivity and avoid bias during this process. And you can consider meta-analysis only if appropriate, but possible if information provided in the individual studies identified is similar. And you can use a single reviewer to create the certainty of evidence with verification of all judgments and footnoted rationales by a second reviewer. And reference on the side. So this should be one of the last steps, indeed it is. So thank you for attending. Once again. Any questions at this point?
You said we did a copy of the slides, didn't you? Did we get a copy of the slides?
Yes. Yeah. No questions? And I will send you a copy of the slides, and just to make it easier for you, I did add some notes where explanation is needed at the bottom. So let me just, if I can click on it, there you go. So this has some notes, but other slides has more notes to help your understanding if you have to go back to it, okay? No problem. Yeah, so if there are no questions,